Hi, and welcome again to the Clive Cussler podcast. Where we talk about international intrigue and submarine spies, and I don't even know what the rest of his stuff is about. I'm just kidding. Welcome to the Clive Barker podcast. With me today is Jose Leitao, and I'm your host, Ryan Danhauser.
Hey, nice entry, by the way. Nice.
Thank you.
All right.
So, let's see. So, what have you been up to these last couple of weeks?
Well, nothing really special. Just finishing up stuff from my thesis and Clive Barker related. I just gave a look over to Books of Blood Volume 2, and that's it. And
okay.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I've had actually a little more time for movies and reading because my baby came home with a disease called hand, foot, and mouth disease, and it puts blisters all over your hands and feet, and for really unlucky people, also in your mouth. I didn't get those, but I had them all over my hands and feet, and I couldn't walk. And I stayed home for 2 days.
Are you feeling better?
Oh, yeah, a lot better. I mean, you can still see the blisters, but they don't hurt anymore.
All right, wonderful.
Yeah, so I read the Volume 2 of the Books of Blood, and I rewatched Dread, and and the Nightbreed comics came in, so I have started reading those. I just finished number 9.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. Those are kind of... They're a lot... The plot is a lot simpler than I thought it would be. I thought it would be more complicated and, I don't know, I guess more chaotic, but it's really just like Boone doesn't want to be Cabal. He keeps on saying over and over, "Stop calling me that," when they call him Cabal. And then and there's these Nightbreed that think that if they kill Cabal, then Baphomet won't ever force them to not eat meat because they just started eating human meat and they like it and they don't want to quit. So they're trying to kill Cabal, and so far there's been these fights between their group and Cabal's group that have been kind of pointless, and nobody really gets hurt or anything.
Yeah, because there's kind of a rogue group of breed, right? Mm-hmm. With a guy that has a face that has like a big beak.
Yeah, and Dagon is like a crab guy.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Who lost his eyes, I guess.
Yeah, and there's like a guy who's half man, half pig, and...
Yeah, and then the one, Oral, who can put all the junk in his mouth and jam things into his gums.
That guy's actually on the cover of the Nightbreed that you were talking about.
Yeah, number 9.
Yeah. That's a really fun cover.
Yeah. I always wondered about, what the heck is that? So now I know.
Yep.
So in the Clive Barker news, the one big one is that Clive sent out a Twitter saying, "Dear friends, I've had some medical issues that have recently forced me away from my beloved desk and into the hospital. But do not worry, I will be home soon and back to causing trouble. My apologies for being off the radar. All my love, Clive."
That was back in the 22nd of January.
Yeah. Yep. And he did go back home again, and he's back to writing Abarat 4 right now.
Wonderful.
I didn't want to pry too much and ask what the medical thing is, and I know people online are sort of supposing that maybe it's his throat or, but I didn't want, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of private. I didn't want to, if he didn't volunteer it, then I wasn't going to ask.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm happy that, he's back home. He hasn't said anything on Twitter yet, but I'm sure that he'll say something soon.
Yeah, and the other thing that I heard is that he's contemplating going on vacation for the first time in a long time, which I think is great. He needs some rest, I think. Although, when he goes on vacation, I really doubt that he would rest. I bet he's just keep on writing anyway.
Yeah, that's one of the main characteristics of writers. I mean, they never really switch off, can they? I mean, it's kind of an obsession.
Yeah. So, Mark Miller told me that Clive was looking good, looking better than he has in a long time. So it sounds like whatever was happened there in the hospital was something good. So that's good news. The other one is Astra Dance Company. They're opening their evening with a poem of Clive Barker's called "I Dreamed I Spoke Another Language."
Oh, great! That's from the first volume of Aberrat, right?
So and that's in Los Angeles, and I don't really know much more than that about it. But and then last week we were talking about that maybe Bert Green wasn't doing anything with Clive Barker's art. But they're running a group exhibition in Chicago that has Despair and a bunch of Clive's Imagining Man photographs, and that's from February 4th through the 1st of March.
Actually, that quote that you just mentioned, my first guess was right. It's from Aberrat. Yeah, it's from Aberrat. It's from Aberrat 2, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing, Aberrat 3 made the Locus Magazine 2011 recommended reading list, which is kind of cool in the young adult section. So just a kind of a little feather in the cap of Aberrat 3 Absolute Midnight.
Can I help you? Sir, get out of the house!
We've had 5 classes together, and this is the first meal we've ever shared.
Well, it's not really a meal. That's a botanical garden.
I want you to come by my place. I want to talk to you about something. You have access to equipment through the film program, right? And you need a project for your thesis.
Yeah.
What if we did a fear study? To live in others' dread vicariously?
I'm in. What is your strongest memory of feeling fear?
I was there no more than 10 minutes before some boy asked me what was wrong with my face.
The concussion left me deaf for 3 years. You live with the notion that the thing that causes you the most terror could come back at any time.
I'm scared of spiders. I'm scared of clowns. Who cares?
Interview me. My dad worked at a meatpacking plant. I'd listen to his boots walk to my bedroom door. I can hardly stand to look at a piece of meat now.
That's what I'm talking about. Honest to God, trauma.
It's a school project, okay? It's not like we're curing cancer.
This was never about a school assignment. If it looks like madness, it must be, right?
Hey, girl. I haven't seen you in like a week. Call me back.
This is on every TV across campus. I just wanted you to see the next phase of my study. Can you hear me? This is where the thread begins. Quaid! I'll let you get away with that.
Where is she?
Let's see how hungry you have to be to get through that. I want your soul to open up for me.
So our main topic is we're on to Books of Blood Volume 2.
Yes.
And our first story here is Dread. And let's go into the story first before we talk about the graphic novel or the movie. Because it's gonna be really easy to slip into those, but
Yeah.
So we've got Stephen is the kind of the main character who's just sort of an aloof sort of a student, and then he meets Quaid and Quaid sort of becomes a guru, and in the story it talks a lot about how it's the age of gurus, and Quaid takes him in and talks more and more about fear, and fear is the beast.
Yeah, Stephen is, I think he might be an English student.
Yeah.
He's like, he's into ethics classes and philosophy, and
Yeah.
he ends up meeting Quaid at a bar, nursing a pint.
Yeah. And they talk about fear. And later on, the more they become friends, and the more he talks to Quaid, it seems like the less he likes him, and he starts avoiding him.
Yeah, it's like they become friendly, but it's more like it's a different kind of relationship. It's like a relationship based on a lot of philosophy and discussion, and it's more like it says in the beginning. It was an age of gurus, and Stephen was unlucky that his guru of choice ended up being Quaid. Because Quaid is not really he's not a very healthy person in terms of his thoughts and beliefs on
And I guess we should probably say like last episode, we're going to spoil these for you. If you don't want any of this stuff to be spoiled, you should probably pause this podcast right now and go back and read the stories and watch the movie.
Yeah.
So Quaid turns every conversation around to fear. And I think that Steven starts to get annoyed by that because he doesn't think fear or dread is as big of a deal as Quaid is making it.
Yeah, Quaid is a really he's a kind of a sinister guy. His description is interesting. He's like a Dutch dope pusher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he says things like that he embraces mutilation by education and stuff like that, and his notion of research is very unorthodox.
Yeah.
I think one of his main lines that he says that kind of like it's the line from which the rest of the storyline stems from is that true philosophy is a beast and it bites.
Yeah. Yep, and so Steven, the more he gets to know Quaid, the less he likes him. He really is in love with this Cheryl character who doesn't really seem to reciprocate at all. And then Quaid ends up getting in a relationship with Cheryl, which bothers Steven, although he doesn't really say it outright.
Right. And don't you get the vibe that Quaid might have gotten involved with Cheryl almost in definitely it was he intended to involve himself in a relationship with Cheryl because he has his own plans, but also at the same time I got the vibe that it was like him kind of asserting something over Steven.
Yeah.
And at the same time,
he's being manipulative.
He's being very manipulative of his friends around him, which end up being more like a trio, which is like just Quaid, Steven, and Cheryl at one point.
So it makes Steven feel sort of like a third wheel or like the odd man out.
Yeah.
And Cheryl kind of feels the same way as Steven. She doesn't feel like fear is as big of a deal as he needs to make it.
Right. She's a very healthy girl that, she refuses to eat meat, and she has her own reasons, and she just plays a really, like, kind of a happy-go-lucky girl that, pretends that nothing's wrong with her. And but the truth is that she gets involved with a really shady guy like Quaid, and and Quaid ends up kind of like you said, like manipulating both Steven and Cheryl to his own plans, because Quaid deep down is also fascinated by fear as a student of fear. Because he has his own reasons to try to overcome his own fears through studying.
And he's kind of a hypocrite because he wants everyone else in the world to talk about their fears and expose them, but he won't tell anybody. And in fact, in this story, I don't think he ever does, right? He doesn't even tell Steven.
No, he says something, what does he say about his fears? That they're unmentionable, or...
Yeah, that they only make sense in his own context, and he's a complicated person, and the complication of his fears is written on the lines on his face, or something like that.
Yeah.
But he kind of blows everybody off when they're like, so what are your fears then? If you think everybody has these dreads or whatever, and he won't tell anyone.
Right. And well, he does. Let me see if I can find. He does wake up in the middle of the night with his own night terrors.
Yeah, and we know that his parents were killed, and that was all that Steven could find out. They don't know. Nobody knows how, but we know that Steven has a fear of being chopped up with an axe by a clown. But it's not really. It might be just a little bit implied that that's how his parents died, but we don't really know that for a fact.
Right. What Quaid says about his own fears was it's beyond analysis. And yeah. And then,
which is a cop out.
Yeah, it's a real cop out. But like you said, he's fascinated by other people's fears and what the truth is that he's gathering information for his study of fear,
and he's studying fear because studying other people's is a lot safer than your own.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And what's really interesting about that is it's sort of in a way a metafiction, because it's like what Clive is saying about people who like to watch horror movies, and about himself too, because he's really interested in horror stories and in writing, watching horror movies. And it's sort of his own thoughts on why that is. Like, he has used that line about the tongue, when your tongue probes the tooth that's bad, and that it's going to hurt, but you keep on poking it anyway. And that line actually appears in this story. I think Quaid says that too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's also a couple of things that are a couple of things that I'm looking at an analysis of the story, and someone raises the point that there's a double meaning verbal layer regarding the characters, because there's Stephen is called Stephen Grace, and then there's a street called Pilgrim Street, and then he mentions gurus, which could be a messiah figure, like Quaid. And
Quaid doesn't have a first name that we know of. We never learn it.
Yeah, it's just a single name. It's just Quaid, nothing else, which is very, iconic. It's that's the only word. And I think at one point I get this vibe that Quaid probably is not even a student at that, university where Steven is going. I think it's kind of more like a kind of a bum that just goes around the university campus.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Because we never really get to.
Although he does say I missed you in philosophy class.
Oh, right.
So I wonder if he's either the professor or a student in the class.
Exactly. Or just one of those guys who spends the time at the pub drinking.
Yeah. I mean, he could be a grad student that, teaches some, introductory courses.
Right, yeah.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
In the story we get to he's been avoiding Quaid for months, and he worked all summer, I think, in some sort of a mill, or I can't remember what it is. And he comes back, and Quaid runs into him, and at the bookstore, and he'd gone to the bookstore early. They call it the library, but it's like the university bookstore. He wants to get the books before everybody else does, and Quaid is there and says, "Hey, I've got some books that you'd like if you want to come by my apartment or my house." And and Steven knows that address is in an area, a rundown area of town where most of the houses are condemned or falling apart. And he doesn't want to go, but it's like out of politeness, he can't think of a way to get out of it.
Yeah. Which makes us think that like Quaid is almost like squatting on a house or something.
Yeah.
Which again goes towards my view of Quaid as kind of this like bum creature. Like, don't really know, what is he doing there? I mean, how does he live? What does he do? It's
So he goes over there, and they and Quaid starts showing. Does he? I forget. Now I'm confusing it with the movie. Does he get chloroformed and wake up tied up and get shown all this stuff about Cheryl, or is he just showing him the pictures?
Well, he shows him the pictures first in the story, and then as he leaves to say that, well, I'm going to get that book you wanted, and all of a sudden Steven is still looking at the pictures and he's thinking, I need to get the heck out of here because they're really creepy pictures that he took.
Then he gets chloroformed.
Then he says that it was really quiet and he couldn't hear anything unless Quaid was creeping up behind him. And then it's just like, oh my God, unless he was creeping. And then it's like he gets like chloroformed or something. Yeah. And then when he wakes up, he's an experiment.
Yes.
But there's something that we skipped here, which is that as Steven moves away from Quaid and Quaid is like dating Cheryl, they start to see less and less of each other. And then Cheryl goes away, and he says, "Oh, she went on vacation." All right?
Yeah. Yep. And there was a time before they separated when, they had been drinking, and he had confessed to Quaid what his real fear was. A fear of being deaf, because once as a child he had been deaf for months, and it was horrible.
He had been hit by a car or something, and the world had become cut off in terms of his hearing, and then he would get tinnitus and all that stuff. So through a bad patch. And then when he wakes up, I'm going to let you pick up from there.
Yeah. So he's locked up in a dark room where he has no sense of how big the room is. He's on a grate, and he can feel his fingers through the grate that it's sort of suspended in the air, and he doesn't know how far of a fall it is. And there's something over his ears. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah, it's kind of a headset with earplugs stuck deep into his ears.
Yeah. And so like, he can hear everything going on in his own body, but he can't hear anything in the outside world, which he's in there for a long time, and he pretty much goes crazy.
It's kind of a sensory deprivation thing because he's stuck in the dark, and he's suspended into an empty void that he doesn't know if it's a pit or if it's just like 2 feet from the ground or 2 inches. And he has something clamped to his head, like a pair of headsets with earplugs stuck into his ears. And he starts to listen to his own respiration, listening to his own, swallowing. Yeah. And he starts to get all that tinnitus that he used to have when he was a kid. He starts getting all those noises, and he starts getting really stressed out over it. And eventually...
At one point, he loses his shoe, right? His shoe rolls over this... Like, doesn't the whole thing kind of tilts? He loses his shoe, it goes over the edge, and he's kind of lost his mind at that point, and he just feels like, you know what, I'm just going to go wherever the shoe is gone, and he lets himself roll down off of the thing. He's regressing to his childhood, because that is bringing him back to the little kid Stephen,
who was, with tinnitus and waking up in the morning screaming for his parents. Yeah. So he starts to regress inside his mind until... his shoe kind of slips out of his foot through the grating, and he's like talking to the shoe like it was alive, please don't fall. Yeah. And then the shoe falls, and he's like, I'll go too. And eventually he drops from the grate, and he passes out.
Yeah. And it turns out that the grate really wasn't that far above the ground. He's okay, except that he's lost his mind. And
basically he got broken.
Yeah. And Quaid really wanted to learn, what happens when he faced his fear. And all he had said something was like "mommy," and that really makes Quaid mad. He felt like this was kind of a waste of time, and he gathers up Steven and dumps him off at a homeless shelter in front of the door.
Yeah, I think Quaid was expecting some kind of epiphany, some kind of like secret being revealed, that he would like see the dissolution of Steven's mind and understand why it was happening, which of course...
And figure out how Steven faced his fear in a way that could help him face his own fear.
He ends up being defeated by his fear and broken.
Yeah.
And so he gets him out of there, and you can see that, Steven is gone, for at least a little gone, because it just went through that traumatic experience and he's regressed into like the mind of a child.
Yeah.
And Quaid shows up, opens the door with a rabbit mask. And, right? I mean, that's the story. I think he opens up the door, he's wearing a rabbit mask, and Steven goes like, "Oh, there's a funny bunny." And he just gives him something to eat or drink or something, and then he drops him off at this homeless shelter.
Yeah. And he figures that his mind is so gone that it'll never get traced back to him anyway.
Right.
And so it ends up being sort of a coincidence that Steven, he puts on all these clothes at the homeless shelter that don't fit right, and they're all kind of baggy and make him look like a clown. And he had bit his lip or his tongue and it bled, and he rubbed that on his face like clown makeup.
Mm-hmm.
And he found an axe and he wandered back to the house where Steven was. Yeah, I mean,
Steven witnesses a lot of violence going on inside the homeless shelter, because it's a place where there are a lot of people from the streets, and some of those people are very territorial, and one of them is hitting the other guy with, one of them is hitting the other guy with a shoe, and they give him a bath, and because he's regressed to the mind of a child, he can't really say who he is or where he lives, and
the shoe just gives him a flashback of what had happened, and where the house is.
The guy's like hitting the other with a shoe, and then throws the shoe in the air, and when the shoe comes down, he flashes to the house on, I think it was Pilgrim Street, and he says, he wants to go back to the bunny, he wants to go back to pick his own shoe or something.
Yeah.
And as he walks out of the homeless shelter, dressed in layers that they gave him because his clothes might have been like dirty or something.
Yeah.
As he passes the exit of the homeless shelter, there's a really beautiful moment that Clive writes, and he sees an axe on the wall, and it says like Steven smiled to the axe, and the curve of the axe smiled back.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I always thought that line was amazing.
Yeah.
And Steven hides the axe under his jacket and just walks out of there, makes his way to the house where Quaid is, and Quaid is having his own troubled night, isn't he?
Yeah. He keeps having these recurring nightmares of a clown coming up the stairs with the axe dragging behind him.
Yeah.
And then I guess him getting chopped up by it doesn't really talk about his parents getting killed, not like in the movie. And I did get that idea, though. You mentioned the movie. I did get the idea from the story, although there is nothing there that will ascertain this as a fact. But I did get this idea that Quaid's parents might have been killed by an axe or something. It seems that way, because all we know is that his parents were killed, and that he is deathly afraid of a clown with an axe.
Yeah, he's got a lot of pictures of people dead with axes in their heads or something like that.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, Steven finds the house, and he's dressed in weird yellow, red, green pieces of layers of clothing and that he got from the homeless shelter. And he's really excited because he's like, hey, I'm just walking into the house with my friend the axe.
Yeah.
In his excitement, he bites his lip, and it becomes red.
Oh, that's when it happens. Yeah, the clown makeup. And then and so he's going up the stairs, and Quaid is really paralyzed, right? I mean, he doesn't know what to do because his fear has actually come to life. And I think he realizes that it's Steven.
He wakes up from one of those nightmares. He's like absolutely paralyzed with fear. He hears someone open the door downstairs or something.
Yeah.
And he's still under that gripping fear that, you have when you have a really bad dream and you wake up and you don't know if it's, real or not. And then he hears like steps coming up the stair. And then he sees like Steven open the door with an axe in his hands.
Yeah.
And that's when I think that, wow, this is really... I was reading the story before I ever had read the comics or seen any kind of visual representation of this.
Yeah, me too.
And I was like, I was deep into the grip of the story, and I felt myself also like, being afraid or, about the story. And then he opens up, and he's like singing to himself, Steven.
Yeah.
Even though he can't... I think Steven is no longer recognizing anything that people tell him.
Right.
It's like he became
but
like
he's
deaf.
not deaf. That's one important thing. He wasn't permanently made deaf by Quaid, so we don't get the sense. I mean, Quaid manipulates people and he doesn't care what they think, but we don't get the sense that he's some kind of a psychopathic murderer or that he maims people or anything like that.
Right. Even though he might end up harming them even more than just physically, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, definitely. He doesn't care about what he does to their mental state.
Right. He basically reduces them to like human, shadows of their former selves.
So there are two really memorable scenes in this story, and one of them is what he does to Cheryl, which is really, really interesting. She doesn't like meat. She's a vegetarian, so he puts her in a room where it's her and a big steak, which is a nice steak. And the more time passes, the more she refuses to eat the steak, the more rotten the steak gets.
Yeah,
but the hungrier
like
she gets.
A slab of meat with a bone coming out.
Yeah, and flies had landed on it and laid their eggs, and so it had maggots in it by the time she finally gave in and ate it. Yeah,
it's another kind of lock you in a room with your fear.
Yeah.
I don't know if as a kid you were afraid of the dark, but when I was really young, I was afraid of the dark, and the worst thing that anybody could do to me was lock me inside a room and shut the lights. Mm-hmm. So sometimes my big brother would be joking around with me, and he'd be like, "Well, are you ready?" And he would like close the door, close the lights, and I would be like, "No, come on, come back." So basically, in this case, while Steven was stuck in a dark room with himself. His fear was, inside himself, and he was like sensory deprived. Yeah. Cheryl is put into a room with a single light bulb where she can see the meat. She can see her fear. The fear is there, is not going away.
And she understands. I mean, she understands why he's doing it.
Yeah,
that he's trying to prove a point that your fear, that your self-preservation or your fear of dying will outweigh whatever other fears you have.
Exactly, and he tells Steven that. He actually had discussed this with her before, but, you get the idea that he might be saying the truth or he might be not saying the whole truth, or maybe Cheryl didn't really understand what was coming up.
And I think, to be fair to the movie, when he says that he fed her some potatoes and gave her some water and let her go on her way, that's just him saying that. We don't really know for a fact that he actually let her go.
We don't, but he does the same thing for Steven, right?
That's true. So it's probably true.
Yeah. Well, we'll just think it is.
Yeah.
But then what happens is that she also becomes kind of sensory deprived, or rather time deprived, because she doesn't know what time it is.
Yeah.
She doesn't know if it's day or night. And, when you're afraid of something, time kind of like, expands or dilates or whatever. And
yeah.
If you're really afraid of something, it's like a single moment or a second can feel like a whole hour.
And her time clock got messed up and she was sleeping like every 4 hours or something like that?
Yeah, and she was like, and this was one of those things where the longer you wait, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
Because the meat was cooked, but then, he says, well, some flies got in there and they started laying their eggs on it, so it was ripening up quite nicely.
Yeah. And it's interesting that eventually she... I lost what I was going to say. Never mind.
Eventually, Cheryl also has her period while she's stuck in the experiment, which is another unpleasant factor that Quaid says, I hadn't planned it that way, but it made it more into the whole meat thing, blood, the whole thing. She felt unclean, so she kept washing herself over and over again.
And he was taking photographs every so often, and then that's what he and Steven were going through when Steven came over on the pretext of getting that textbook. Yeah, and even though Steven, had endless conversations with Quaid about fear and everything, at the point that Quaid is showing him these pictures, he starts to think, this guy's nuts, and I need to get out of here. Yeah. Because he's like, he recognizes that, the deviant behavior that Quaid is showing him, he's breaking all the ethics rules, and, and he basically had, Cheryl break near the end of the experiment, because eventually she gives in, like Steven did, and she just grabs the side of beef with maggots and everything, crawls under a table like a caveman, and just eats the whole thing to the bone. Yeah. And, that's the last picture that Quaid shows to Steven. And he says, I was surprised how quickly she'd given in. 1 minute she was cursing him, and the next minute she just dove on that meat and started eating it. Yeah. So that's one of the memorable scenes, and I think the second one is the ending. Oh yeah, the ending. Yeah, and so Steven has lost his mind. He's dragging this axe up the stairs. Quaid is kind of paralyzed with fear, and Steven just starts chopping him up with the axe, and not in any kind of way that kills him right away. He just... and it's like we were talking about before. You were talking about the last line of the novel, of the story. Oh yeah, that's a really powerful line. Yeah, let me see if I can find that really quick here. And Quaid knew, meeting the clown's vacant stare through an air turned bloody, that there was worse in the world than dread, worse than death itself. There was pain without hope of healing. There was life that refused to end, long after the mind had begged the body to cease. And worse, there were dreams come true. So that's a pretty cool final line of the story. And I think when I first read it, I had thought that there was something sort of magical about the way that Steven was keeping... or that Quaid was staying alive, like long after he should have been killed. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it's, Well, the narrator says also a few lines before that. He says, like, the little clown, which is Steven, laughed to see such fun. There was a night's entertainment to be had here, he thought. The axe was his friend forever, keen and wise. It would cut and cross-cut. It could slice and amputate. Yet still they could keep this man alive if they were cunning enough. Alive for a long, long while. Yeah. So... Steven actually is doing his best to keep Quaid alive for the sake of his own fun. Yeah. And it's like you can't even imagine like Quaid facing his fear, and it's just a really powerful scene. And then this reflects a lot into the comic adaptation, which we will address next. But well, we can go ahead and do that. Because if I've read it, it was a long time ago, and when it first came out, and I don't remember anymore. Yeah. Well, the adaptation, the comic adaptation, is painted by Dan Brereton, which is an amazing artist. I actually own one page of art from this story, original page. Yeah.
It's the page where Steven is talking to Quaid, and I think it's right after he shows him the pictures of Cheryl. He's like, coming up behind Steven, and he's like putting his hand on his shoulder, saying, "Hey, I got something to show you." And he's like, "Hey, what is this? Porn or home porn or something?"
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's one.
Oh, yeah, because they were pictures of Cheryl, and he's like, "Why are you showing me this?"
Yeah. And the comic book adaptation is pretty amazing. And we were talking earlier before we started recording that indeed there is the final splash of the comic book is just an amazing piece of art. And the way that he illustrates the story, very cinematic way, very, beautiful way of painting, a lot of vibrant colors. Quaid is just like I visualized him in my mind's eye. And there's actually when Quaid is frozen by fear and Steven is coming up the stairs, the artist switched the viewpoint of Quaid to kind of distorted view of Steven as a clown, and it's pretty amazing. It came out as an Eclipse novel.
Yeah.
Has a beautiful cover.
And those Eclipse books are better, I think, than the Tapping the Vein in terms of production value. I mean, you can either get them in hardcover or trade paperback. I think they're just really nicely done.
Yeah. It's a perfect adaptation. It doesn't really change anything. It's very faithful to the story, which is something I really enjoyed. And, what can I say except that I really recommend it.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you a few more information about this because I don't have it with me right now.
Okay.
But it's adapted by Fred Burke and Clive Barker and illustrated by Dan Brereton.
And if it's the Tapping the Vein, there's probably a lot of little snippets from the narration in the graphic novels.
Yeah, little squares of narration.
Yeah,
straight
out of the story.
Yeah, straight out of the story. Exactly. It's very, very, very faithful. So it's really cool. I really recommend it. It's a little out of print, but you might find it in reprint, like that thing that you have the.
Yeah, I've been looking. There's no, as far as I can tell, there's no electronic version of these Eclipse. Books of Blood stories. So I've been kind of looking on eBay. Maureen had said that she's thinking of selling her comic books, so I'm going to see about that too.
Actually, just in preparation for this Skype call, I kind of was looking up some things. I found a link for a signed copy by Clive Barker for $20. I can send the link to you.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
And so I think as we get into the movie, before we even get into the actual movie itself, I kind of wanted to talk about the packaging of it. It kind of annoyed me that this thing came out like it was part of some cheap collection. It says on the box, After Dark Horror Fest 4, 8 films to die for. And it's part of some group of horror movies by Lionsgate that you have never heard of. And I think it was released theatrically that way, right? Like part of some triple feature, or I don't even know exactly. I didn't see it in the theater.
I didn't see it in the theater either because it didn't make it to Portugal, but I did see it. I did rent it and I saw it. I don't own the DVD.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna come out and say that I didn't really like the movie that much.
Yeah.
It was directed by Anthony de Blasi.
Yes.
And the main reasons why I didn't like it is because it changes some really strong key elements of the story that worked for me, that made the story work for me. And I wasn't happy with what they put in that place.
The other thing is that you can't get it on Blu-ray, which is surprising because it looks like it was filmed in high definition. but you can't get it on Blu-ray, and it's got this cheapo kind of packaging. I got my copy from a store in California where I'd flown to a signing one time.
Great.
Dark Delicacies. So they had sort of a party, release party for this movie where you could get it signed. So I've got mine signed by Anthony DiBlasi and Clive Barker and two other people whose names I can't read. I think they put a little note in here that says, the woman who played Cheryl and the woman who played Tabitha Swan.
Was that the lady with the port wine thing on her body?
I guess so, yeah. I think that's right.
Right, because they included extra characters into the movie.
Yes, yeah. Which I don't know if the movie would have been too short if it had stuck to the original. You know, and we talked about this with Midnight Meat Train, that all the additions that they made on that movie helped the story and really kind of fleshed it out and made it more, made it a richer kind of a movie experience. And I don't know for a fact that that's the case in Dredd. I don't know that we needed, especially that Steven's fear was not of being deaf. Steven's fear was of that his brother had killed himself in a car accident when he was drunk.
Yes, and
that was kind of explored a little bit, but it was not really.
And was he, like, afraid of the car model? Because I really didn't get it.
Yeah,
I
Quaid thought that he would be afraid of the car, and Steven is like, it's just a car, what's the big deal? And there was one point where Quaid was drinking and driving him around really fast, and he just started getting mad and said, let me out of the car.
Right.
So they created a new character that they could do this deaf person experiment on. And the way he did it was a lot more crude. He put like strapped these cups over his ears.
Yes.
And when that didn't work, and Quaid was annoyed that he'd strapped cups over this guy's ears, he took a gun and fired it next to both of his ears so that his eardrums burst.
That was.
And I thought that was going too far. I mean, that's not the Quaid from the story.
Well, not at all. That's one of the things that really pissed me off at the beginning was Quaid in the movie. He's kind of a mixture between a kind of a jock or a bully. He's not as cerebral as the character in the story of the short story.
Right.
I mean, not at all. While Quaid was this guy who probably would enjoy like talking and picking your brain over, a glass of whiskey. Mm-hmm. This other Quaid from the movie is just this guy that all he wants to do is live fast, pick up chicks in nightclubs and just be a general kind of douchebag.
and he paints these naked women that are like strip club models and stuff, or strip club dancers, and
it's.
And you find out later that he's also painting, he tells Steven that he throws them away after he's done, but you find out later that he's actually saved them in a back room that Cheryl discovers, and he's painted axe wounds on top of them. Mm-hmm. But they're kind of really pretty amateurish looking paintings.
Yeah. So I think this movie started being shot in Scotland in June of 2008 by Anthony DiBlasi. I think this was a Matador Productions.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And that's the same group that was going to do Pig Blood Blues, and they were all ready to start shooting, and the money just didn't come through for Pig Blood Blues.
Right.
So
it's the actors are Jackson Rathbone and Sean Evans.
Yeah. And Jackson Rathbone he's somebody from the Twilight movies, right?
Is he? I don't know.
But I can't. Seeing this again, I remember. It says that on the box that he's from Twilight.
Yes,
and I just, I've seen the first two Twilight movies, and I just can't. I don't know. I can't remember who he would be on there.
I'm looking at his IMDb. Yes, he was in Twilight, the Twilight Saga.
Yeah.
Yeah, part 2, I think.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, wait. Breaking Dawn Part 2. Oh, well, whatever. He's been in a few movies then.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be a character named Jasper Hale. So,
okay.
yeah, but then this whole movie started being introduced. They started sending, like, material to websites like Bloody Disgusting and stuff like that, right? I remember that I first started to see, like, paintings, like, I think some of the early promo media that they sent to horror websites were a painting of a girl, the girl with the port wine stain all over her body. Yeah. And then there was something, some message there. I don't remember. I'm trying to look up.
One thing that bothered me about this movie, too, was that the color of the movie is, like, really yellowy, brownish, kind of.
Yeah.
Like the tone or the hue of the whole movie is that way, and I don't know why, but that just kind of irritated me.
I think it has to do with that whole blue and orange thing that goes on in movies sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So the early Dread viral marketing stuff that I remember seeing was the painting of that girl with the port wine thing over her body, and it said some people are on the inside. And this popped up at shocktillyoudrop.com and other websites.
And it probably made Clive Barker fans. I didn't really follow it that closely at the time, but I imagine it probably made Clive Barker fans go, "What? What does that have to do with Dread?"
It was supposed to be a painting done by Quaid, because the painting was actually signed and said Quaid at the bottom.
Oh,
and then there was a message that came along with this that was sent along as a part of the media package. It said, I think this was like Quaid talking, and it says, "This is a picture I painted of a girl named Abby. She has a port wine birthmark covering half of her body, her leg, her stomach, her breast, her face. Abby's going to participate in our fear study, going to share with us her deepest dread. Abby learned at a very young age that she would always be an object of scrutiny. She confided in me, and all she wants is to be normal. Would you like to be part of our fear study, Quaid?" So that was, when they were promoting the movie, they were sending this stuff to websites. And people were going, "What?" And and then eventually we discovered that the movie, whereas the story was like just pretty much a trio of people just chatting and coming up with these, discussions on fear and philosophy, in the movie they go really overboard. They create this group in the campus called Dreadheads, right?
Oh yeah. They're doing a thesis, they call it, and I don't know if they mean like a graduate study thesis or just for some class. They're
film students.
Yeah,
Stephen is a film student in the movie instead of an English student.
Yeah, both he and Cheryl are film students, and I think Abby works in the library, and Stephen works there with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, they were putting like posters over the campus saying, "Be a part of, the fear study, be a dreadhead," or something like that. And I'm like, no, this has nothing to do with the subtleness and,
So Abby is a new character, which I think she's not bad. I mean, one thing I can say that's about this movie is I think that the performances are really good.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't mind Abby. I thought Steven was kind of a jerk to her because she was really interested in him, and he kept saying, "Oh, I don't think of you that way," or "My heart's in another place," because he was also in a relationship with Cheryl, which was this relationship with Cheryl was why did that happen in the movie? It's not in the he only had a relationship with Cheryl in his mind in the story.
Yeah, it was like they were like friends, and they hung out a lot, and there was like a little bit of sexual tension between them, kind of like a trio thing between Quaid, Cheryl, and Steven, which eventually lets Steven, out of the equation, because then he starts to move away from them because he was also moving away from Quaid.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the movie, he's in a relationship with Cheryl, and Steven is sort of a threat to that. And he's definitely a threat to his relationship with Abby, which is, he wants to just be friends with Abby, which I get the sense that he's just really shallow. And that he, the real reason he doesn't like her is because of her birthmark.
Yeah, I mean, Steven is a really, I don't know if this is the word, but a really emo character. He's got the whole, Robert Smith Cure-like hair going on and a little, 5 o'clock shadow.
Right.
Well, Quaid is this guy that, has spiky hair with gel and is, really clean-shaven and very,
I know what you mean.
Sexually aggressive guy, very assertive. Which is actually the opposite of his character in the story.
Yeah, and it's also what makes him attractive as a guru, I guess, in the movie, is that Steven is so afraid to say what he thinks, or I don't know, and or to be aggressive like Quaid is, which is really different from the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the performances are good. Particularly, I like the person who plays Abby and the person who plays Cheryl. And I think the guy who plays Steven does a pretty good job, too. But I don't, then we get to the ending, and I feel like we were robbed of the ending that we were expecting. Which, obviously, de Blasi does that on purpose. Because he wants to say, hey, this is my movie. You're not going to just get a rehash of the story. I'm putting my own touch on this.
Yeah.
So the guy who is not Steven, the guy that he makes deaf, he drops him off somewhere. We don't really get a good sense of where he gets where. I don't remember even where he gets dropped off. If it's it's not a homeless shelter. It's a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
But the door that he gets dropped off at doesn't look like a hospital door. But he wakes up in a hospital, and also Abby is in the hospital nearby because she was so mortified when he showed a video naked of her all across campus. Somehow he got them to play a video on every TV on campus of her naked. And so she got so upset that she tried to bleach her skin off.
Yeah, what do you call that? With one of those metal scrubs or something.
Yeah, steel wool.
Oh my God, she tries to get her birthmark out with steel wool and bleach, and she almost bleeds to death.
Yeah, and so she ends up in the hospital, and I think that this is too much of a leap for Steven, but when he sees that, he grabs an axe and charges over to the house on Tollington, right?
Yeah.
And he starts hacking through the door, and he's going, "Come on out, Quaid. Why don't you face your fear?" And he's hacking the door with the axe, and Quaid is kind of huddled up in the corner and afraid. And then Quaid and then, we're thinking, okay, now we're getting back to the ending as we're watching this. But then Quaid comes out with a gun and points it at him and says, "You think you can scare me?" And he hits him in the head with the gun.
Yeah, and you've got to say this. The guy who's fearful of being deaf, he gets cups. What kind of cups are there? I don't even know. You get some glasses or something, and a belt strapped to his head.
Yeah.
And it's like, Quaid didn't really think this through, did he? I mean,
no. And then Quaid gets mad because it doesn't really work that well. And he says, "You look ridiculous. You look like a spaceman." And he takes him off, and the guy's like, "Oh, thank you." And then he, shoots. Then he shoots a gun next to both of his ears, so his eardrums burst. So that guy wakes up in the hospital. He sees Steven in the hospital, who was visiting Abby, and he follows him back to that house. And he's kind of gone nuts, and he's regressed the way that Steven was supposed to have.
Yes, the character that Steven plays in the short story actually gets turned into this guy in the movie, and it's weird. I mean, it's like we're splitting characters and creating new characters, and
So
from one character, they create two characters, and I don't even know what they're doing in this movie.
So Steven wakes up, and he's tied to a chair, and Quaid starts showing him the videos of what he did to Cheryl, the scene with the meat. And there was actually pressure from producers to not have this scene in the movie. And de Blasio thought that was central to the story and central to the movie, and he got, I think, Clive to fight for keeping that in.
I don't understand why de Blasio stated, when he was announced to do this movie. He said that this was his favorite story from the Books of Blood, and he said he assured fans that everything from the story was going to be in the movie.
Yeah.
So,
but the ending is not. The ending's not at all.
I know. It's like a friend of mine commented. It's like, so he went ahead and changed everything.
Yeah. Well, and I think that if the ending had stayed the same, probably a lot of this other stuff would have been forgivable. Having the extra Abby character or the deaf guy character.
I guess, yeah.
If the ending had stayed the same, so the deaf guy comes, and we're thinking, okay. Steven had dropped the axe, and the deaf guy comes in and picks it up off the floor. And we're thinking, okay, now we're getting the ending that we're expecting, the ending from the story. The ending that's one of the most memorable parts of that short story. So he comes in, he swings his axe, and he misses Quaid, and he hits Steven. Or maybe he hit him on purpose, because he thinks that Steven is all, he's a part of the fear study, and I'll hit him too. Or whatever, and he hits Steven in the chest with the axe and kills him, and he's just sitting there sort of giggling, and because he's deaf, he doesn't hear that Quaid's standing right behind him with a gun, and Quaid shoots him in the head and kills him. So now you're thinking, wait, no, how is this ending still going to happen now? Steven looks like he's dying, and then Quaid, Quaid sort of straddles him and is like staring in his eyes, watching him die, because it's really important to see how he gets over his fear of death, or I don't know.
Right.
And so
it's just like a car crash in slow motion. This ending. Yeah.
Yeah. So then Quaid had, just like in the story, he had told Steven, after the study was over, she knew what it was about. I fed her some potatoes. We didn't really talk or anything. She drank some water and she left. And we're thinking, that's what it was in the story too. That's cool. And then, but then he drags Steven's carcass into this room where Cheryl is chained up, and he unfolds a pocket knife and throws it down into the floor, and he says, "Let's see how long it takes you before you eat that." Meaning the corpse of her boyfriend, Steven. It's like let's see if you're willing to eat him.
By that time, I think my expression watching the movie was just a blank stare, and my mouth was like hanging open.
Yeah,
and I was very disappointed.
I was too, and because Quaid was supposed to finally get what he deserved. It's supposed to come around full circle, and he has to face his own fears.
Yeah,
and apparently he succeeded in facing his fears, because he, gets up and points a gun at Steven and says, you think you could scare me, and he hits him in the head with the gun and knocks him out. So it's like, okay, I guess his fears aren't really that big of a deal after all.
Exactly. I mean, I think that this ending perverts and dismisses the original finale.
Yeah.
Which had the whole concept of nightmares coming true,
And you can see why he did it, because it's the thing that you do in a horror movie. You make kind of a twist ending where the bad guy gets away. But that's not true to the story.
I hope that this movie is not something that will actually scare people away from reading the original story. I hope that people... The thing that really annoys me is that sometimes when a director, they say they love the source material, and they say, oh yeah, this is very faithful to Clive Barker's story. I've put everything of the story in there, and then they just start pasting their own story elements and names into the story. They do a bad job of it.
Yeah.
And someone who has never read Clive Barker will watch the movie and say, well, I don't really get the whole thing about this story because I didn't like it that much. because it's an inferior movie, while the story is such a great, piece of work. And, and one of the things, if I can go back to the beginning, you were saying that you thought that if they had been more faithful to the story, if they had put in the ending that we remember from the short story,
then we might have forgiven the extra characters. And
I'm going to say no, because I think the movie was kind of flawed from the beginning with the whole Quaid guy.
Yeah.
They broke Steve off into two characters, which, really doesn't make much sense.
Because they didn't want to ruin Steven too early in the movie, I think.
Yeah.
They wanted him to survive, and they wanted you to have hope that he was going to live through the end of the movie. I think that's the reason.
Yeah, Cheryl is very... Cheryl doesn't have any depth to her character. She's basically just there to have Quaid have his little experiments. And they should have made Cheryl as interesting as Abby instead of creating Abby. Because, Abby is there for, sympathy and, for us to see that, Quaid is a really bad guy. He's really, he's evil.
Did you get a sense that actress really had that birthmark?
Not really.
Oh, okay. I kind of... It seemed that way to me, that maybe that they really, found that actress who had that birthmark. But I don't know. I couldn't say that for a fact.
I'm going to gamble and say that I think it was just really good makeup job. Okay. But I don't know for sure, of course. But I'm going to assume that such a big, port wine birthmark would probably just be makeup. But then, they made Steven a film student, which then, in the book, I think it made more sense for them to have that discussion about, ethics and philosophy.
Yeah. That was a little bit of an update, I think, from the story, just because they could film these people instead of just him taking photographs.
I thought the way that they started talking about fear was something that came from them to start talking about ethics and philosophy. Yeah. And then philosophy is a beast and it bites, and the real philosophy is fear, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I think that their transition from hey, I'm Quaid and let's talk about fear was not very, not very good.
I'd have to say that he says touch the beast way too many times in the movie.
Right, yeah, because I think that they thought that would be like the tagline for the movie.
Yeah.
And then they just go to club picking up chicks and looking at strippers with Quaid and, Steve as Quaid's wingman. And And
Quaid has waking nightmares, right? I mean, everywhere he goes, he sees women start to be split open by an axe, because we know in the movie version his parents were definitely killed by this crazy dude with an axe.
Exactly. That they actually have pictures or something, or police pictures or something. And he goes to a strip club and there's the stripper and he starts to see her being split open by an axe or something.
Yeah, and she starts freaking out because of the way he's reacting to her, because he's looking all scared and disgusted.
Yeah. But, then there's the whole thing with the, let's make a documentary, let's invite people and ask them about their fears, and it's I see people, I think that, the other guy, the guy who's fearful of being deaf, he's like a fracture of Steven, and I don't think there's any need to do this. They could have just, to be honest, if both Steven and the deaf guy are going to die at the end of the movie, why not just make it Steven? Why not just make it Steven? Right. And why they had to split Steven into two people? And this... And the way that Quaid does it has absolutely no planning, no interest, no real study behind it.
Yeah.
Not like the story where Quaid is actually trying to study fear and he's trying to plan his experiments.
And in the DVD, there's an interview with de Blasi and Clive Barker where he talks about that quite a bit.
Yeah, and like I said in my review before, I think this Dredd story was a version that's twisted and out of true and repackaged for the Saw and MTV generation.
Yeah. And I think you can make that connection because it's you take the people being trapped in a room and facing their fears, and that's really. I mean, I haven't even seen a Saw movie, but I know just from just because that stuff is everywhere. I know what the Saw movies are about, and you can make that connection.
And what did you think of Quaid being a bare-chested painter, painting huge canvases, like smoking? And does it remind you of like Clive? I mean, I feel almost sacrilegious saying this, but don't you think this might have been written in by de Blasi just to please Clive?
I kind of wonder because, Quaid wasn't like that at all.
No.
And de Blasi said in the interview that people were treating him like he was Quaid. And Clive said that he wrote the character Quaid because he knew this guy that was kind of an asshole in college that reminded, and he wrote this story based on this character that was like Quaid that he knew in real life.
Mm-hmm.
So he wouldn't probably want the character of Quaid to be anything like him. Clive wouldn't, anyway.
Well, at least Midnight Meat Train and Book Blood were pretty good.
Book of Blood. And especially Midnight Meat Train. I think, and Book of Blood is probably about half as good as Midnight Meat Train. Dread.
If I had to ask you for a rating for the Dread movie, like out of 10 stars, how many would you give it?
6.
Yeah, I'd probably give it like 5. Yeah.
Yeah. There were some parts of the story, like the scene with Cheryl. That's hard to watch, and it's really, what you expected from the movie, to see a movie version of that. And I think that, they pushed to make that as true as possible. I mean, he was videotaping instead of taking pictures, but that, same difference. But overall, splitting up adding new characters, splitting them up, I don't know that they needed to do that to pad the movie to make it movie length. Not the way it needed to be done for Midnight Meat Train.
Right. If I can mention something, which is from an unfilmed version of Dread, which was planned to do by Fox. I think we can add this discussion to a future episode where we discuss like other bad movies.
Yeah.
But I have a script of I think it was written by a guy named McWeeny or something. And I got this script, and it was meant to be an adaptation of Dread, and it was very, very strange. It involved like a classroom and a professor who would try to make their students like have a project about fear or something. There would be like a crumbling house, and there would be like, I'm going to reread the script because I haven't read it in a while. It was a really weird, really strange script which had very little to do with Dread. But I'm going to send you a copy of it.
Okay. I'll read that.
And we will discuss this in a future episode of the podcast because I think this will be a really interesting thing. So just putting this aside here about this other unfilmed Dread script that made the rounds on the internet, and it belongs to Fox. So
well, we're over an hour in, and we still have the other stories to go. So I mean, they don't have movies, but I think we should probably move on to Hell's Event.
Right, Hell's Event. Yeah, that's a fun story. That's kind of a campy story.
Yeah, so every 100 years, this race is run, and one of the competitors is from Hell. And if Hell does these kinds of contests, and they almost never win, but if they win this one, then they get control of the Earth. So it's a big deal in terms of that. And you get the feeling that this is the same Hell that the Yattering comes from, because it's got that same kind of feeling to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very old-fashioned kind of like hell, right? I mean, it's like the hell of fire, damnation, and little demons. And
yeah, but he calls it the Gulfs, which is really Clive Barker-esque, because no one else calls hell the Gulfs, and you see that over and over in like the Books of Blood and anything that has Harry D'Amour in it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So the Cameron is the main runner, who's our main character. He's been pushed. Or no, I'm sorry. Joel is the main character.
Yeah,
Cameron is his trainer.
Is his trainer, right?
Yeah, Cameron, during the race, or just as the race is about to start, Cameron sees something really strange. He sees Voight, who's supposed to be one of the runners in the race, get into a limo, and so he gets on his bicycle and chases this limo down, and he finds them in this I guess a warehouse in the basement, and it's all frozen and cold there, and he finds out that he finds out basically the backstory that we're learning, that this is a race with hell.
Yes, the main villain of the story is this guy called Gregory.
Yeah.
Right, and his athlete is actually not human at all, and it's going to be a race through the streets of London, and so basically this is I think very few people know, just a handful of people know what's being put at stake here in this race, and Gregory, that's the villain, I think. Yeah.
Voight is what I.
Voight, right?
Yeah. Well, there's and Burgess is the maybe his first name is Gregory. I can't remember, but Burgess is the guy who's like the politician who's got familiars, and they look like Voight.
Oh yeah.
They're demons. So one of them's running the race, one of them's like his limo driver, and another one is just hanging around with him. And so Cameron tries to, Hell comes up to meet with everybody, and you don't look at Hell. So all the demons and Voight and Burgess, they kneel down and put their heads on the ground. Cameron says, "This is my chance to get out of here," and he runs and gets on his bicycle and runs away. And there's a recurring theme in here that Clive uses, which is kind of like it's the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot's wife, that you don't ever turn around, don't look back. Yeah, and that's a recurring theme in this story. So Cameron ends up looking back, and he saw hell, and his brain caught on fire, and he died.
Right. It's because even the athletes, they can't really look back. I mean,
yep, the ones that look back, they die, and the way they die to them is much different from what the people on the sidelines see. They just see him collapse, and they think, so and so collapsed, he can't take it anymore. They don't even realize that they're dead.
Right, and basically, this race is going on, and there's our hero who is running and doing his best to stay in first place. There's Hell, which is in number 2, I think, and then there are the other guys who are trying their best to win the lead. But then, like you said, and whenever they start getting really close to the lead, they look back, they see Hell running up behind them, and they die. And,
so Hell is way in the back, but Hell's racer is Voight, who's in the front.
Right.
And Joel looks back, and he actually sees Hell, but he doesn't die like the other ones, but he knows what's going on. So and we've got another racer called Frank McLeod.
Yes.
And Frank McLeod is sort of is sort of Joel's competitor, that he races against him all the time. And Joel sees Frank McLeod collapse, and Frank says, just keep running. Don't worry about me. Whatever you do, don't look back. So now Joel knows something is going on. He looks back and he sees Hell, and he knows that Voight is a runner from hell, and they sort of get in a fight, and they're rolling around on the ground.
Right. It's coming back to me. And then, like, the racer from hell kind of, like, bites his face off or something.
Yeah, so you're thinking, oh my god, this Joel character, who we thought was the main character, is dead. And the runner who's sort of the tortoise of the race, Kinderman, I think is his name.
Yeah, Kinderman.
Ends up...
He's like the underdog.
Yeah.
He's got glasses.
Yeah.
And, he's like always in the back in the last place, and there's really nothing for him to look back to, so he just keeps on running.
Yep, and he doesn't pay any attention to what's going on in front of him either with Joel and Voight.
Yeah,
he wins the race and Hell loses.
Yeah, because like at the time when Hell's athlete kills Joel, he assumes his real shape. And he just becomes a little disoriented because demons are supposed to be really stupid.
Yeah.
And that demon's job was just to run and win the race. And then there's like the guy, is it Voight, that says, like, come on, run.
Burgess. It's Burgess.
Burgess, yeah. Cross the finish line. And the demon is like, what? And then all of a sudden you see the guy who was in the last place, Kinderman, he just keeps running. He's completely oblivious because I think in the story they make him like nearsighted as well.
Yeah.
So I think he really didn't realize what was going on.
He's totally oblivious.
Totally oblivious,
Yeah.
And he just goes on and crosses the finish line before the demon can get up from killing Joel and cross the finish line.
Yeah.
So humanity wins against hell.
So Burgess has to own up to the fact that he and his demons lost this race, which had pretty big stakes because Hell could have ruled the earth. And so Hell's kind of, following him around, and he's walking, and he won't look back because he knows as soon as he looks back that Hell's got him. So they're like, just turn around, Kinderman. We know it's not your, or Burgess, we know it's not your fault. Go ahead and just turn around. He goes, maybe another time.
Yeah, and he's walking inside the hallways of Parliament, right?
Yeah, and then he gets to a dead end, and I was like, oh, crap. And he won't turn around, and Hell's like, turn around, and he won't turn around, and then Hell wrenches his head all the way around backwards like The Exorcist. And it grinds his vertebrae together, and he dies. And
Burgess dies standing up for the wards to find him the next day when they go into Parliament or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a nice story. It's a nice, book the blood story. Not one of the best, not one of the finest.
There was one thing that's sort of telling about the way Clive Barker's sort of, the magic that he sees in the world, I think, or the character Finnegan Hobb in Abarat.
Mm-hmm.
So he's dark-skinned and he's half night and half day, right? He's got one parent that's from night and one parent that's from day. So there's a line from this story, Hell's Event, that says, nothing would take him. He was a barbarian with the manners of a gentleman, neither night nor day entirely.
Uh-huh.
So I thought that was kind of cool, that recurring theme of a person with dark skin being sort of half night and half day.
Yeah. One of the things that I enjoyed in this story was when the guy Burgess, he's standing in that like icy basement.
Yeah.
And to make the deal with Hell, to give him the power that he has, he had to give up his 2 thumbs.
Yeah. So he started out as a kid just sacrificing animals and stuff like that, and Hell was like, we don't really need all that. We'll tell you what to do, don't worry. And so they taught him how to mutilate himself.
Yes.
So that he could, so that they could give him things.
But yeah, it's like you said. It's Hell's Event has to do with the kind of like Faustian story.
Yeah.
That the kind of like pact story that exists also like in Yattering and Jack
mm-hmm.
and Hellraiser and the Damnation game.
Definitely.
Yeah, and Burgess
the Last Illusion also.
Yeah, exactly. And Burgess, the villain, is a guy who he's a member of Parliament. That's why he's walking in the House of Parliament when hell kills him, because he sacrificed himself for power, and he became a member of Parliament, and that's when he became like hell's representative or something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, next one is Jacqueline S. Her Will and Testament.
Yes. Jacqueline S. is really one of my favorites too, and
so this is a woman who's really depressed, and she hates her life. She obviously doesn't care about her spouse at all, and she goes in a bathtub and cuts her wrists and tries to kill herself.
But she survives, and her husband takes her to a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Yeah.
Which one was?
After she gets out of the hospital.
A physician, yeah. She takes her to a physician, Dr. Blandish.
Yeah.
And, they try to tell her, well, you're just depressed, and
I understand a woman's problems and stuff like it, really, really condescending and patronizing.
Exactly. And so she says, you know nothing about being a woman, so be a woman. And all of a sudden, the doctor his body starts contorting and expanding, and he starts to become a bloody mess because his body is reshaping itself into the body of a woman. So his chest expands, his hips expand, and his pelvis breaks, and he just falls to the ground in shock, bleeding everywhere. And he's like, "What's going on?" And she's also shocked because she has no idea how she did that.
Yeah, so this is the first murder that she does that's not really intentional. Because, you think things all the time and you don't expect them to actually happen.
Right. And so she escapes the office, and people end up thinking that some other mental patient of the doctor went in there and killed the doctor. And so she gets away with that murder, more or less. Yeah. And she's living with her husband, and her husband is kind of I think he comes off a little bit as an abusive kind of husband, someone who really doesn't care too much about her.
Yeah, he says, you made us sleep in separate bedrooms, and you have to understand that I went off the rails a little bit. And she's like, I don't care if you have an affair. She really doesn't care about him at all. And he says... And he says, no, it's more than an affair. I really love her. And he starts describing how different she is, which really kind of sets Jacqueline off. She's like, I don't want to hear any of this. I don't care. Do what you want. And he's getting really angry and abusive because he wants to be able to tell his story and he wants to be able to unburden himself.
Yes.
And it's this idea of it makes, it's like this idea of that when you confess a thing that you did, it's really for yourself, to make yourself feel better, and you don't really care about getting an apology or how it makes the other partner feel. Right,
and all the men in her life called her for some kind of nickname instead of Jacqueline, which is her name. They either call her Jackie or whatever, and she hates that. Yeah. And she turns her husband into a suitcase, right?
Yeah, she tells him to shut up. And so at first it makes his mouth grind together, which is just, and his teeth turn to powder, and it just makes your, just puts a chill down your spine to think about it. It's because his jaws clamp together so hard that grinds his teeth together, his face and his head smash together, and then his whole body folds up into the size of a suitcase.
Yeah, his arms fold inwards, his legs kind of fold inwards, and he just becomes like a suitcase. And
the first murder of the doctor, they couldn't get anything out of her, and they just assumed, because it's this woman, that there's no way that she could have done this to the doctor. So it had to have been somebody that snuck in the window and murdered this doctor and then took off. But now she knows that she can't get away with it a second time.
Yeah.
And this was the first time she did it on purpose.
Exactly. By this time she realizes that she has this power, and she starts to make the transition from being a victim of men to actually doing something about it and using her power to become something, above any kind of ridicule or dehumanizing of herself. And she actually ends up killing, the men in her life. So
yeah. So the next man that she meets is Oliver Vassie, who is an attorney that knew her husband. Mm-hmm. And he becomes obsessed with her, but not in a way that bothers her at all. She likes him. And she stays with him for quite a while, but then she decides that and he learns about what she can do, but he doesn't mind. But she decides that she needs to learn from somebody how to use power. So she looks for someone that's really rich and powerful to teach her.
Yeah.
So she leaves Oliver Vassie and goes to a man called Pettifer.
Exactly. It was this rich guy, kind of like a little shady, and he has like a few henchmen. Mm-hmm. And
you get kind of a mafia feel from him.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say like a mobster, but I really didn't remember very well if he was meant to have that vibe or not.
Well, and I think most of his business is legitimate. But you also get the sense that he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah. And then he starts to, like all men, he starts to seize control of her. And I think, and at one point he calls her a whore. And, that's all she wrote.
Yeah, that was it. So she turned him into a pig. Or she made his, so he looked like kind of a beast animal thing. And one of the bodyguards freaks out and shoots him.
Yeah, that's... And the guy is still insulting her while she's transforming him.
Yeah.
He really was a tough guy to break. And and then Vassie, by this time, is still looking for her. And most of his story is written as a testimony of Oliver Vassie.
Yeah, and he's trying to piece together where she went, how he can find her again. His whole life is in shambles because he's pretty much... he says something... There's one point where he says something about children like pulling on his sleeve, and you get the feeling that he might even have a family that he's completely abandoned.
Could be, yeah. Because he becomes so overcome with fascination and desire for this woman. Because... I think there's one scene where they're making love, and he starts to see her skin like shimmer, or something. Oh, she's sleeping or something.
Yeah,
and he looks
her skin shimmers like waves on the ocean.
Yeah, and it's like a very protean, transformation that she's doing while she's sleeping, and it just blows his mind. And he's like, "Wow, she's unique in the world, and I want to be with this woman because she's a miracle or something."
And he's the only one that doesn't try to manipulate her.
He's the only man who submits to her. Yeah. So all the other men try to control her in the story, and this is the only man who wants to surrender himself to Jacqueline S.
Yeah. So he finds out that she became a prostitute in Amsterdam. And he tracked her down there, and a man called Koos, who was supposed to... He had specific instructions to, if Oliver Vassie comes by, just let him straight in. Don't take all of his possessions or his money like you do with everybody else. Just let him straight in. But Koos is a jerk and doesn't realize how important Oliver is to her, and takes all of his possessions and his money, and makes her wait a day, and then he finally lets Oliver in.
Yeah, we skipped over the guy called Titus. There's another guy in the story called Titus, right?
Was that the bodyguard?
I think so.
That had talked to her while she was in the house after Pettifer had died.
Yeah, I think so.
And she said, she talked to him about his family and his mother. She said, "What did your mother do?" And he said she was a prostitute. And then she said, "Was she happy?" And he said, "Well, she never really seemed happy or sad."
Right. Koos is like he's kind of like a pimp of the miraculous. He's like, he holds her in lock and key, and any man that goes in there needs to hand over to him all his earthly possessions, almost.
Because he's going to die anyway.
because it's, I think it's unspoken, but of course all the men that end up making love to Jacqueline S., I think they end up dying.
Yeah,
so,
well, he actually says that it's in the narration that's
it's like
why.
It's the ultimate lay.
Yeah.
The one that,
And apparently all these people that know her or have been with her come back knowing that they're going to die and that they're so obsessed with her it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like there's all these other people like Oliver out there that, and he just thinks that Oliver's another one of those people.
But Oliver is special because he's going to be the last one.
Yeah.
And he ends up tracking her, and he finds Koos. He hands over everything he has to Koos, practically the shirt off his back. And he opens up the door, he unlocks the door, and he goes in, and Jacqueline Hess is spread eagle on the bed, tied up, and she's naked. And she's in a position of ultimate vulnerability, but still, it feels like she's lost control of her own power, because, like, her flesh is it's become, like, scarred and crisscrossed because of stretching and unstretching so many times, and it feels like her body is, like, out of control. Like, she's becoming, uncontrollable.
And that's why she's tied up. It's not something that Koos did on his own. That she asked him to do that.
Yeah, she's in agony, basically. She tells him that she's in agony. And he, surrenders to her, and he says, well, I'm here, and he lays to sleep with her, and basically they kill each other by thinking themselves united, they kind of melt into each other and they die.
Yeah.
And then there's one final thrust where, like, his penis becomes like a big, harpoon or something, and her breasts become these huge harrows, and they prick each other and they die.
Yeah.
So that's a really amazing story, an amazing ending.
Yeah. And she killed Koos also when he came in the door. As soon as he came in the door, she just crushed his lungs and killed him.
It's part of the finality because she knows that Vasi is going to be her last one.
Yeah.
And after this, there's not going to be any more tomorrows or any more clients. And she just goes ahead and kills Koos because she was done with him, his purpose was done.
So this is very much a story about the oppression of women, which is a recurring theme of Clive's. And different avenues and different ways of looking at it, and you see it in Rawhead Rex, you see it in Weave World, you see it in Imagica,
Madonna.
Yeah, and it's all about this power of women that's been sort of smothered by men and the way that men run the world.
Exactly, and I get this idea that Vasi. He becomes, he's the only one who, wants to submit to her power instead of all the other men who just want to control her. But it works against him because she gets bored of him for a while, and then she kind of realizes that, he was actually someone she wanted to be with in the end.
And even Pettifer, who wants what Oliver ends up getting. He wants her to kill him in a special way that only she could do, and but then of course when he gets it, he doesn't want it after all. But Pettifer, even in him coming to her and trying to force her to kill him, he's still trying to manipulate her.
Exactly. He wants her to do what he tells her to do.
Yeah.
So it's not like, and there's a funny line here that they remind of the joke between the sadist and the masochist. Which is like the masochist is telling the sadist, hurt me, and the sadist is going, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this story has layers and layers of, meaning, and we could discuss this for another hour.
Yeah.
Jacqueline S. One of my favorite stories. I would really like to be able to go back to it one day and discuss it a little further because it's an amazing story. I really enjoy this one. I think this is the only story that doesn't have any kind of adaptation, not even a comic book adaptation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Which it could. I mean, they could have chosen that one.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
no
definitely.
reason. There's nothing that would make it not adaptable as a comic book.
Mhm.
It would be particularly horrific to see this as a movie.
Yes, I think they would have. We're at a point where they would have great special effects for the death scenes, but
yeah, it would be
it would
really
be
tough
the-
to watch.
they would have to edit that stuff.
Yeah.
Probably they would tone it down too much, and then we would be complaining that they didn't do enough.
Yeah. So then the next one is The Skins of the Fathers. This is one of my favorite stories of Clive's of all time. I'm more of a monster guy, I guess you could say. I like the monster stories. So that's definitely what this is. We have the first character, Davidson. I think you start out the story kind of sympathetic to Davidson, and he just becomes more and more of kind of a jerk as the story goes along. But his car breaks down in the middle of the desert, and he sees this procession way out in the distance, and he runs up to them to try to get their attention so that somebody could help him with his car. And he figures out that, wait, these are monsters. They're sort of Lovecraftian kind of elder god type monsters.
Yes, they're making kind of a procession in the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah. And one of them sees him and runs at him, and he's like, oh, God, and he tries to run away. He falls down and covers his head, and the monster runs right past him and rips his car to shreds and catches on fire.
And the monster is running towards him with a very obvious erection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
so
like-
you get the impression that it's sort of like having sex with the car or raping the car somehow while it's tearing it apart. And the car explodes and catches this creature on fire, and it runs into the town of Welcome, which I think the name for this town is hilarious. I mean, it's so ironic.
Yeah.
But it runs into the town of Welcome, and it collapses, and you pretty much figure it's dead. And the sheriff comes up to it and is poking at it with a stick, trying to be this big man. And the creature has mouths; it has teeth on its hands. He grabs one of the limbs and lifts it up, and the creature's eye opens, and it bites his hand and snips off his fingers.
Exactly. That it's another one of those moments that could work very well in a movie. Would be definitely one of the scary moments in the movie.
Yep. And then we switch perspective to a family: Eugene, Lucy, and Aaron. So Eugene is the father, and his wife is Lucy, and they have a son named Aaron. And Eugene is just despicable. He's just awful. To both Lucy, he's abusive, and to his son Aaron, who's only like 7 years old.
Yeah, he's a drunk, and he threatens his young boy.
Yeah.
That what would you say if I killed you? And he was like, "Oh, no, please, Daddy," or something.
He said, "You should be thanking me for killing you."
Yeah, but he knows that his son is different, right?
Yeah. So one day he was out. He was out in the desert with his wife, and they were having sex, and the monsters came up, grabbed him, and threw him like 20 feet off of her. And then they sort of took over, and it wasn't really exactly rape because she was, she felt that they were tender, and it was this sort of divine experience. But what ended up is that the son, Aaron, is actually the son of those monsters, not of Eugene, and he won't admit it to himself, but he knows, and it's just kind of ruined his life from then on.
Yeah, we know that there's like a scene where she is like reminding herself, Lucy, she's reminding herself almost in a sort of nostalgic way of 6 years ago, right? When, like you said, like she was like making love to her boyfriend at the time, I think, or husband, and they would just go into the desert and they would just lie there beneath the wide sky, and they would just be there all afternoon just going at it. And then she looks over his shoulder, and there's like this huge hand that picks up Eugene, lifts him up, and she finds herself surrounded by monsters, huge
Yeah.
monsters. And then she says that for the hours that followed, the embraces of the monsters were not foul in any way, not gross or harmful, never less than loving, like you said.
Yeah.
And, after the monsters go away, and she kind of gets this feeling that that was the climax of her life, that kind of like her purpose was done, and
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So
and
she
then
just
she
sort of retreats into this shed and lets Eugene kind of take Aaron and abuse him however he wants, and she's just sort of a broken woman.
Yeah, and even when the Eugene is beating up his kid is, you know, different. He's like the perfect little boy, but he's very quiet. He's very smart. And there's one scene where his father is beating him, and he puts his little hands on the floor, and he feels music coming from the ground, and he knows that there is something special, and he has this idea that something's coming.
Yeah. And they do. The monsters come, they tear the roof off of the house, and they pick up Aaron and take him away.
Yeah.
And so Eugene grabs Lucy and drags her over to welcome and meets up with Packard, who's furious because he'd gotten his fingers bitten off by this monster. Mm-hmm. And then there's a woman named Eleanor who's just, you know, equally awful. Well,
his fingers weren't really eaten by the monster. His hand was bitten by the monster, and then the old lady, Eleanor, shoots a shotgun at his hand with the monster hand that's biting his hand.
Yeah.
And then she says, "Your hand's gone."
Yeah. So it could have been her fault too.
Yeah. She when the sheriff was messing about with the tentacle that had the mouth on the end, it kind of like came alive and stuck his hand inside the monster's hand, and then that thing was shot by the shotgun, and he lost his hand.
Yeah.
But like you said, the monsters come, they pick up Aaron, and Aaron starts calling them Papa and Daddy, and you know.
Yeah. So so Eugene and Lucy are in town, and they're meeting up with this posse that Packard, the sheriff, sort of created, and they've got all kinds of crazy weapons. It reminds you of the scene in Nightbreed when they're getting ready to assault Midian.
The Sons of the Free.
Yeah. So they go up the mountain to find these monsters and start attacking, and the monsters retreat. They leave one sort of a warrior behind to take care of all of the rest of these guys. Mm-hmm. And there's all this chaos. They're throwing the cars around, and a lot of the people die. And
when they start to round up the posse to fight the monsters, at the time nobody believed Eugene and his wife that there were monsters in the desert, and Packard, the sheriff, is coming over in the car, and he stops and sees Eugene because Eugene is looking at the town and sees the town is on fire and everything, and he said like, "Oh, we owe you an apology, Gene."
Yeah.
So then they all gather up.
And in the meantime, they've also been dragging Davidson along. And he's like, "Can't I just go home? I really don't want any part in this."
Right.
And they've been dragging him along, and then after a while, he starts to get into it. He starts to think like, "Oh, when they kill as they're setting this monster on fire, it's like when he was a kid and he used to step on jellyfishes on the beach." Mm-hmm. So then when Davidson was our sort of anchor person, the person that we're supposed to identify with, now it's kind of like, I don't really like you anymore, Davidson. I don't really care if you die now.
Right. And then the sheriff is like telling people, and like, "Men, we've arrived, we're organized, and we got God on our side."
Yeah. And, very much, a foreshadowing of Cabal and Nightbreed.
Exactly. Yeah, and then Davidson is thinking, well, as attacks go, this might not be the quietest. And and so he goes along with them. Meanwhile, Aaron is in the desert, kind of like being almost kind of revered by his monster parents.
And we learn through the narration, which if there was a movie of this might be difficult for them to pull off, but we learn through the narration that women have always existed, and these monsters have always existed together with the women but the women wanted a plaything, so they created men. And men have been sort of was the biggest mistake that they'd ever made, because they'd been a scourge on civilization. They'd hunted all these monsters down. They'd oppressed the women.
Yeah, it says here that the women had always existed. They had lived a species to themselves with the demons, but they had wanted playmates, and together they had made men. The marriage of semen and Lucy's body was the same mix that made the first males. So little Aaron is like the original male.
Yeah. And so, but they made Aaron to try the experiment again and to try to do a better job this time.
Right.
And
so
Aaron seems, from what we can tell, Aaron seems like he's a good boy. And they don't know. They want to see how he lives his life.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, during this attack, and this is just totally unforgivable, but Eugene shoots his own son in the face and kills him.
Yeah.
And then we've got a Lord of Illusions moment when, predates Lord of Illusions, when they take all the sand in the desert and liquefy it, and all these people sink into the sand like the cultists in Lord of Illusions. And then he makes it hard again. So then they're all buried in the sand, and one guy is just a mouth and nose, and there's one guy that's gone crazy that's just a head sticking out of the ground. And Davidson he's like up to his waist, so he's kind of okay. But he sees Lucy, and he says, "Please, Lucy, run and go get help." And she starts running, and you don't know whether she's running away, whether she's actually going to try to get help. But she's thinking that they're all going to die, because there's no way that she could get help in any time at all.
Yeah, it's like Eugene is carrying Davidson, and they're still looking for the boy, and the battle is still raging on, and they find the boy, but the boy is like changing, isn't he?
He's turning in. His face is kind of light is coming out of his face, and he's getting like tentacles, I think.
Yeah, you said that the father accidentally shoots him on the face, but it's more like a fear reaction.
Yeah, no, not accidentally, not at all. He does it on purpose.
The son starts to like shed away his humanity, and he becomes his father's son. I mean, he starts turning into all the monsters combined, and it says here, Eugene could only gape as Aaron's transformation continued, his entire body now overtaken by the tremors of change, marvelous in its complexity, as out of the cradle of the boy's substance came new glories. And then he just gets so upset about this that he ends up shooting it, and the monsters get really upset. And that's when what you said happened, that a huge body, a huge hole in the middle of the sand starts appearing, like kind of a whirlpool that swallows cars and people and everything, and then as it closes, it becomes like hard as concrete. Yeah, and that's when some people are trapped there, and Davidson, he just asks Lucy, which is the boy's mother, to please help and fetch help. But then the narrator tells us that it would be noon before she could fetch help to the woman, to the torso, to the head and the mouth. And by that time, the wilderness would have had the best of them. Yeah. And Lucy is also pretty, ethereal. She's like having, her life is like turning into a lucid dream. So she's like very hazy. Yeah. And she says, "Yeah, okay, I will."
Well, she's running through the desert, so we don't know that she's actually going to survive either.
Right, and she just sees the people trapped in the sand as little dots and commas of human pain. Yeah. And she goes she kind of like looks at them and she thinks, what's the point? And she starts walking, and then after a while she begins to run, and that's how it ends.
So we don't know if she's going to get help or what she's going to do. But we don't have a whole lot of hope for them.
Even if she makes it, the by the time she could get help, the people would be dead. Yeah. But so the monsters go away, and Aaron is dead, and, it all ends up in a big mess. Mm-hmm. Not a happy ending for the monsters, amazingly.
No, it's really, really sad. And this is another thing that Clive does a lot, where he'll give you kind of a glimpse of this magical other world. and then kind of rip it apart and see, show how humans or how something will wreck it.
Wreck it, yeah. Well, not much to say about the comic book adaptation, except that it came out in Tapping the Vein book 2.
Yeah, and it's not bad. I mean, I didn't have anything bad to say about it.
I like the art
pretty closely. I like the way that they drew the monsters.
Exactly. It was adapted by Chuck Wagner and Fred Burke. Fred Burke also adapted Dread for the Eclipse graphic novel, and it's illustrated by Klaus Jensen, which some comic fans out there might remember from the Daredevil comics and stuff like that. So it's pretty nice. That volume also has the adaptation of In the Hills, the Cities.
Right.
So
you can't go wrong with that one.
Nope.
So next story is New Murders in the Rue Morgue, and I think this is probably the strangest Clive Barker story he's written.
Yeah, especially because it's almost kind of derivative, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't do derivative at all. But this is an homage to the Murder in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe, and it does kind of that, that thing where somebody will say like, Bram Stoker really knew the truth. There really was a Dracula, or and then make a movie based on that. Right.
Ate a monster.
Yeah, like Frankenstein was my uncle or my great-grandfather or something like that. And Mary Shelley really knew him, or, stuff like... So it does that. So Auguste Dupin, I think is his name, right? Was the investigator who investigated the murder of the ape, and he had met Edgar Allan Poe in a bar and told him that story in another story.
Yes. And it was like the ape was brought by a sailor, and, if some of you people out there are familiar with Murders in the Rue Morgue, it's a story about this
orangutan.
This murder, a violent murder of 2 women that this detective starts to investigate, and he finds that, although people say, it was some guy and he spoke Swedish, or some guy says, no, he spoke French, no, some guy says he spoke English, and actually it turns out that it was a monkey. And the reason why the door was closed on the inside and the killer nobody ever found the killer and the women were murdered, and is because it was a monkey and he came out the window and he went down the building and So, in this case, I think it's this guy who's going to Paris or something, right?
Yeah. And he's really proud of the story of how his uncle or grandfather?
Yeah.
It was his father's brother was C. Auguste Dupin. And he was really proud of that fact, and he had told his friend tried to imitate the story by training his own ape, his own orangutan.
Right.
And there was a repeat of, and the way that this ape was killing people was just horrific.
Yeah, the main character of the story is a guy called Louis, and his grandfather... Oh, no, wait. His great-uncle was C. Auguste Dupin, the detective from the Edgar Allan Poe story.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then there's a debate throughout this whole story about whether that original Murder in the Rue Morgue story was true or not.
Yeah, even the very street, morgue, probably didn't exist anymore, and at one point they questioned maybe the Rue Morgue had existed as it had been described in Edgar Allan Poe's immortal story. Maybe it was pure invention. Yeah. Whichever, the notorious street was no longer to be found on a map of Paris.
Yeah. Which kind of makes you wonder if Clive was in Paris at some point and trying to find it.
Yeah, well, I think I'm pretty sure that he's probably been to Paris.
Yeah.
Because, being such a man interested in painting and art and theater, he's probably been to Paris a few times.
Yeah, I would think so. So then we never really learned the truth about whether that was a true story or whether his great uncle had just made it up and told Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah. Isn't there a point? Isn't there a point in the story where he walks into a bar and there's like someone has a newspaper clipping of like
a gorilla?
The gorilla
that they'd hung out in the town square or something like that.
Right.
And he asked the bartender, "What's that all about?" And the bartender's like, "I don't know."
Yeah. So there's he's an old man, Lewis, and he's trying to meet a friend of his. Right, it's a friend of his that is living there.
Yeah.
And apparently they like lost touch, and he wants to know what happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
Philippe, I think.
Yeah, Philippe is in prison for the murder of this girl that was way younger than him, that he was dating.
Right, that's it. So he goes to Philippe's apartment, and it's locked, and then he sees someone in the apartment, and is like this guy with a big coat and a scarf over his face and a hat,
and he smells really strongly of perfume.
Yeah, and he's holding a razor, and so Catherine was a friend of Lewis as well, and she also knew Philippe, I think.
Yeah, Philippe was her brother.
Right, and then she says she screams and she ran away. So there's this mysterious man who was living at Philippe's apartment.
Yeah.
And Lewis goes there and he finds the guy with the girl, right?
Yeah.
And he finds out that the guy who is with the girl, he's feeding her like pills, and she's like a prostitute or something, and she's like high on pills. And she's like, he's ugly, but I've had uglier.
Yeah.
And the guy is actually an orangutan, and he shaves himself from head to foot.
Yeah.
And he just drips himself, and he just puts cologne all over his head, and puts on Philippe's clothes. And he was an ape that Philippe trained to be human.
And Philippe had sent, there was somebody else that was a friend of Philippe's that had gone on ahead to investigate. And Philippe finds him in the closet, murdered with his lip pulled up over the top of his head.
Yeah.
And so it peeled off like the whole bottom lip and his lower jaw, and the guy was just kind of shuddering there. And he's trapped in the closet for hours, and he passes out, and when he wakes up, the orangutan is staring at him.
Yeah, he opens the door and looks at him, and it's like, he says something to him, right? He speaks, I think.
Yeah.
Doesn't he say something like brother or something?
Or maybe Lewis.
Lewis or something, yeah.
Yeah, and he offers the woman to Lewis, and Lewis is like, no. And this part I didn't quite get. So Lewis is sort of stumbling out of the house, and he falls over a rail into an icy river. No, he actually jumps into the river. He's been so shocked by the whole thing, the unnaturalness of an ape behaving as a human and, going around with women, that it says here that the passers-by who saw the old man clamber onto the parapet of the Pont du Carrousel stared but made no attempt to stop him from jumping. He teetered a moment as he stood up straight, then pitched over into the threshing, churning ice. Okay, so he did it on purpose.
And then someone says, "Who was that?" And someone says, "Who knows?"
So he probably felt a little guilty that his friend had tried to imitate the story.
Yeah.
And he felt responsible for these murders too, I would imagine.
Right, and the girl says, well, the prostitute says, well, that guy, Philippe, the guy says, well, that thing over there, and she says, who, Philippe? And he says, he's not called Philippe. He's not even human. And she's like, and the woman is like,
she's like, yeah, she's all...
Please use yourself, and shrugs.
Yeah.
So, and the ape does speak and says his name. Yeah. He does say, and he uses Philippe's voice to speak, because that's the guy who taught him to speak.
Yeah.
So he actually mimics Philippe's speech.
And the only reason that he never killed Lewis is because there's a photograph of Philippe and Lewis and, what is the woman's name? That's Philippe's sister.
Catherine,
together, and so he knows that's a friend.
Yeah, and he's naming him as an equal. It's like Lewis, You know, it's like putting his hand there, and it's called Lewis. Like I'm also one of you, and there's a really a really kind of happy ending, which is even though the main character dies, commits suicide, you end up looking at the monkey and the girl taking a stroll in the streets of Paris. You know, it's like, you know, hand in hand or something.
It's sort of reminiscent of his early plays, you know, with monsters that turn into people, animals that turn into people and back into animals again. And
it says here, like, in mid-morning, a young woman with red hair, her arm linked in that of a large, ugly man, took a leap, strolled to the steps of the Sacré-Cœur. The sun blessed them. Bells rang. It was a new day. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get like, wow. I mean, it's derivative, but it's done in such a way that's very, you know, Clive Barker.
Yeah, and I think the undertone of it is that, you know, that this idea that we're above animals, that, you know, we're more evolved than animals, but you take one and you try to make it into a human, and you get a monster.
Exactly. A monster that will kill people, and, you know, just as easily as they, you know, have a banana or something. This story also doesn't have any adaptations, right?
There's an Eclipse graphic novel, but if you try to look it up on eBay, it's super rare, and they want a lot of money for it.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I've never read it. I don't think I ever owned that one.
Well, I don't own it, which is kind of surprising to me. Let me check here. Eclipse. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, there is something. Yeah, there is something here listed as the locus index to science fiction. Interesting. I'll have to hunt this down because now I'm interested. Yeah, the adaptation of New Murders in the Rue Morgue. It turns out that it is on an Eclipse graph novel. It's on The Life of Death. That's the main story of the Eclipse graphic novel, The Life of Death, from the Books of Blood. And then the second story is New Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Oh, because I've seen it on eBay. I've seen it with that title. So there must be a rare version of it that's just that by itself, too.
Oh, could be. The one I'm talking about has the face of a woman, and half her face is a skull, and the other half is human.
Yeah, I've seen that. I probably owned that.
Right, yeah, well, you know. Okay, that's it. So.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So, the contest, we did have a winner from the last contest, so congratulations to Brian Roman. So he actually answered both questions, even though the first contest was over. I sent him over the advanced reader copy of Weave World, and I sent him the U.S. first edition of Books of Blood that was signed, Volume 1. So I sent that last week, so by media mail, so it's going to take a little while to get there. But congratulations again, Brian Roman.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So we have a new contest. This is another easy one. So who has been quoted as saying, "I have seen the future of horror, and his name is Clive Barker"?
So, I know this one.
Yeah. So the prize there is the Box of Blood. It's a little box with Books of Blood trading cards.
Sweet.
So, yeah, if you know the answer, go ahead and send it to us by Twitter or Facebook. On the website, you can do a comment, but just whoever's first.
Right, guys,
we do have some feedback for today, for our podcast today. We got one from Twitter. Mark Hartkamp says, "Hey there, greetings from a Barker fan from Germany." So, hello, Mark Hartkamp. And I'm probably mispronouncing your name.
Hello, Mark.
Yeah. And then from Facebook, we have from Heath Fodor says, "I'd like to hear a health update on Clive." Okay, so we talked about that a little bit. The information that I got is that he's happy, he's looking better than ever, he's back at home working on Aberrat 4 right now. So I didn't, I purposely did not ask what the issue was, because some things I think, if they want them to be private, they should stay private. But we know that he's doing well. And the second part of his question is, if all of you have watched his first two films, Salome ... and I think he means in the Forbidden. So do you want to talk about that?
Salome and the Forbidden?
Yeah.
Sure. I was not prepared for that, but
yeah.
We can actually. Can we relay this to a future episode?
Well, he's just asking if we've seen them. We don't have to, we don't have to go nuts.
Oh yeah. I've seen them. I own the DVD from what's the name of the Revenge or something like that.
It's sort of an artsy soft porn.
Yes, gothic vampire thing. There's an introduction in the beginning. It's Redemption Media or something like that.
Yeah, I have that too, and I have seen them. I have to admit that these things go over my head. When at least the first time I watched them, I was like, they're silent films, and there's a lot of jumping around and.
Yeah, I actually posed some questions to Clive Barker, to Doug Bradley at one point. And
really?
He was kind enough to answer them through his website. So I'll definitely have to copy that and print it out so I can, we can bring this up on a future episode. But the thing is, those books, those movies, they were done a really long time ago. And,
was it like 78?
Well, 1973 for Salome, and The Forbidden was 1978.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Yeah. These movies, the versions that we've seen in the DVD, or if you can find them on YouTube or something, they actually were more... some of these, especially The Forbidden, only came to final form in editing when they released the DVD. I mean, before that point, it was just a bunch of, separate scenes. It had never gotten the final form. So they're available nowadays as kind of a curiosity from Clive's early years. But to be honest, I think that Clive himself in interviews has mentioned that he mentions that material is very encoded in terms of symbolism and meaning. Yeah. But that he even admits that he himself no longer remembers what some things were supposed to mean. So it's been like 40 years, people. And
so it's really artistic, it's really artsy, but if you get that DVD, there's probably more minutes in previews for other things than the actual movies themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, The Forbidden has some early elements that might have turned up into Hellraiser. Because if you ever seen The Forbidden, there's kind of a nail board that happens that shows up in the movie, and Doug Bradley talks about that, and he says that later, a few years later, he would see the same effect of the nails in a pattern applied to Pinhead's face in Clive's design. So he was like, well, this probably comes from The Forbidden. Yeah. And The Forbidden is supposed to be this kind of like Faustian deal with the devil, because there's this guy in the beginning and who's played by Pete Atkins, and he kind of like makes a deal with the devil, and the angels come and they skin him alive. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's artsy. It's art house, very experimental, avant-garde movie. And of course, Salome has to do with the play from Oscar Wilde. From the scene of the Bible where John the Baptist was arrested by Herod, and Salome danced for Herod, and then she asks for John the Baptist's head, and that's what the movie's about. So there's a Salome dance in the movie, but we'll probably discuss this a little further in future episodes. So.
Yeah, but we have seen it. It's not like the most accessible thing that you can watch of Clive's, but for fans, it's an interesting little kind of a side note into, or it's an interesting glimpse into the beginnings of his imagination.
Yes, and you might end up seeing more of Clive than you want to see.
Yeah.
Because, I'm going to leave this one hanging there, because The Forbidden has some nudity involved, and it's Clive. So, you're warned.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
And it's a kind of nudity that they don't allow in rated R movies.
Yeah.
So that's it for our feedback and questions. If you want your feedback or questions to be on the next podcast, you can leave a voicemail on Skype if you want to, and then we'll just put it right in. Or you can do Twitter or email, or on the forum at Fifth Dominion, and all that's on our website, www.clivebarkercast.com. This one ended up being a lot longer than I thought it would be, but thanks for listening, and everybody have a good day.
All right, signing off.
All right.
If you don't go out and find the beast, sooner or later the beast will come and find you. That's the safest way to touch the beast.
Yeah, see, I don't think I really want to touch the beast. I want to chase the beast.
It's for you. Find the beast.
Quaid! Ah! Face the beast! Ah! You want to face the beast?
Take solace in this. You faced the beast. The beast won. To live another's dread vicariously was the safest, cleverest way to touch the beast.